Side chapter. The gremlin was a basic, standard monster, and it was aware of that. It knew this because when it had come into existence several weeks ago, like a suddenly cast shadow, it had been born with a comprehensive knowledge of what it was and how it came into being. The knowledge made the gremlin extremely angry. They knew the anger was by design because it was explicitly spelled out to them by the system, which only made them even more angry. What was a monster? Imagine that underlying all of reality, at the very, very bottom, was a vast sea of pure probability. Infinite potential. Something that a highly sophisticated and advanced being, like, say, the system, could fish into, to produce one yottagram of some rare and unlikely material that only formed inside of a supermassive black hole at the request of asshole space elves. It's like fishing for tuna, but completely different. Except exactly like fishing, it wasn't an exact science. Sometimes, actually very often, the system pulled up some sort of terrifying, reality-ending thing and had to deal with it. Because now, it existed, whereas before it was mere probability. Even if the system successfully pulled up the yottagram of whatever the fuckium, it was still covered in weird probability slime. Basically, it was a messy process that produced industrial waste on a cosmic scale. What to do? Obviously, it was way too easy to just reach into the infinite sea of probability to get anything and everything anyone could conceivably want ever, so stopping wasn't an option. Thus, the world. It rendered the terrifying reality-ending thing into chunks, sifting through it via extremely complicated and esoteric math. It converted as much of the thing as possible into something positive and useful. Loot, treasure, wonderful animals and plants and buildings. Strange and mysterious, wonderful and exciting. All as a result of that cosmic waste. Eventually, the math ran out, and the only thing left was a big chunk of bad. The glowing chunk of green stuff from a nuclear power plant that scientists still can't figure out how to neutralize kind of bad. So the system carved that up too, rendering one big chunk of bad into as many small chunks as was possible. Dungeon cores, cursed objects, and yes, monsters, were a few of the many options available for disposing of a giant chunk of bad. The system had been doing this for a very long time, and had perfected an endless number of templates to perfectly encapsulate the bad. When the equation was balanced as much as it could be, the system pulled the trigger. At that point, everything came into existence all at once. The yottagram of whatever for the space elves, a bunch of valuable random treasure for the world, and a horde of monsters that needed to be neutralized. If the system had been able to pull it off, it would have simply had the monsters kill each other. Wouldn't that have been convenient? The system dreamed of the day he'd be able to pull that bit of trickery off. Unfortunately, the system couldn't just do whatever he wanted. He had to get the thing to agree to be processed, and he had never been able to get them to agree to a game in which they were guaranteed to lose. There had to be a chance, however small, of victory. The monsters grew more powerful by advancing through various ranks and evolutions, while players grew more powerful by leveling up and obtaining powerful classes. The two groups generally chased each other around with sharp objects, and the monsters generally got destroyed eventually. As far as the system was concerned, there was nothing wrong with this plan, and he'd come up with the perfect method for scamming free wishes out of reality. After all, whenever the space elves asked him to do something, he always took a cut. All he needed was a disposable workforce that had no choice but to exist in a world filled with monsters and constant violence. In that, and only that, The system was grateful for the space elves using it as their first strike weapon against all their problems. The gremlin knew all of this, and would rebel against its fate, save for a simple reason. It was subject to the same biological drives as all other living creatures. It got tired, it got hungry, it got bored. These things were typically evil, so the system had made hurting non-monster creatures feel good. They considered that a kindness, one they never intended to repay. So the gremlin trudged along the beach, looking forward to an evening in which he and his tribe would get their primitive and cruel kicks at the expense of the big-headed gray female, then eat her and grow more powerful in their pursuit of the destruction of everything, everywhere, across all time. The worst part was, this particular monster knew that he had once been a part of a Lovecraftian, planet-sized mass of pure hatred, and that he had been expertly reduced to several gremlins scattered across the world. Worse was that the system had managed to convert most of him into treasure. He had been turned into the very tools that would be used to perpetuate this whole scam. The gremlin spat, making sure to aim at the prisoner/dinner guest. At least the next generation of monsters wouldn't be burdened with this knowledge. They were currently growing in gross, easy-to-hate, vibrantly colored slime balls, and would be born in a more normal way. The system would still use their bodies as toxic waste barrels, but they wouldn't know. They would just be monsters. The gremlin spat something in the language it had been born knowing, and the other freshly generated monsters nodded in agreement. Reality was stupid, and they were going to break it. It's worth mentioning that monsters didn't come exclusively from the system. Many of them formed naturally, as a result of mana saturation, or were just plain old natural creatures who were total jerks. There were also monsters that had been thrown into the system by the space elves, which generally fell under two types. The first of which were the monsters they found in their exploration/conquest of the universe. The Empire would constantly stumble upon planets that had destroyed themselves through some disaster of advanced technology mixing with warfare. The Empire would send whatever genetic, robotic, or trans-dimensional horror the native species had failed to tame straight into the system. Then there were the monsters the space elves created for fun in a lab, strapped a trans-dimensional antenna and broadcaster to, and threw into the system for entertainment value. There were a few competing shows in the Empire, but watching the world was a galactic pastime for the space elves. It was a classic reality show and was never going to be canceled. The world was full of monsters, but only the most naive of fools would ever try and reason with them. Chapter 9. "Short bus? I think I can negotiate with those things," Ben said, his voice quiet but still sure the shark would be able to hear him. "Oh, okay. Good idea," Short Bus said, sounding like he was nodding his head. Ben, in a few short words, had no idea what he was doing. What he had were a bundle of instincts giving him unhelpful suggestions and a bunch of civilized impulses giving him absurdly bad advice. He risked his advantage of surprise by rising out of the ocean and standing on his feet for the first time in many hours. Then he utterly compromised his advantage. "Ow!" Ben shouted, his feet hurting quite badly from standing on the hard rocks. If Ben had been anything close to paying attention to his own body, he would have realized he was wrinklier than a naked mole rat, and his feet were soft. Immediately, 5 pairs of eyes turned to face him, 4 sets of them bulging red, 1 set pure black. One of the creatures, which Ben did not know were called gremlins, pointed at him, opened its mouth, and started screaming in just an awful way. They dropped the woman and started running at Ben while holding their spears in a competent way, while he tried his best not to slip on his own feet and fall on his ass. Ben felt his eyebrows go up, and he started smiling. His brain completely unprepared to go from swimming around with his pal, the great white shark, to short, furry little monsters charging him with spears. He started laughing nervously and turned around, diving into the water without hesitation and running away from the fight. "Holy shit!" Ben said, once he'd gotten far enough away to surface and look at the beach again. A spear was flying directly towards him, a fatal hit, but Ben blasted some water and was able to dodge off to the side, then dove back down and ran even farther away. He surfaced just in time to see the brown little assholes raising bows into the air and firing in his direction. "Why are you so accurate with that shit?" Ben said, seeing death flying towards him once again and running even farther still, way out of range of anything reasonable. When he finally resurfaced, he saw the monsters standing on the edge of the water screaming in his general direction. One of them was still doing the arm-pointing and creepy scream. The second was dancing, and then turned around and squatted down to shit, staring at Ben with a mean, absurd smile. The third scooped up a handful of sand and ate it, chewing with angry, rapid force, also making eye contact. The fourth was wiggling around in a disturbing way, while making freaky chirping and clicking noises. If Ben had been more illuminated to the history of recently spawned monsters, he would have recognized that the fourth gremlin was attempting to taunt him as though he still had tentacles. "Oh, shit! Ben, you suck at fighting. Those guys would have eaten you alive, literally," Short Bus said, swimming up slowly and circling him, his voice extremely positive and upbeat. "That," Ben said, still with that shocked smile on his face. "What? What the fuck just happened? What's going on?" Ben asked, feeling like he'd just been woken up from a deep sleep. His memory complex still hadn't loaded up, and he was in a complete amnesic fog. "You were going to talk with those guys on the beach. Oh man, I don't trust your judgment at all anymore. That was not a good idea. You okay, buddy? Come on, swim it off," Short Bus said, catching the edge of some of the rags Ben was still insisting on wearing and starting to pull him along. Ben, for his part, went along with it, and Short Bus let go and Ben put on a utility pocket over his face and dove below the surface. "Yeah, gotta swim it off," Short Bus said, chatting to fill the silence in Ben's mind before Ben's brain could. "I remember when I was a young shark, I picked a fight with a dolphin, and I totally would have won if all its asshole friends hadn't shown up. Barely got out of that one alive. Ate a couple of dolphins after that when I was bigger. I'm pretty sure they were either old or sick, but it's the principle of the thing. Once I went way too far south and got chased around by a killer whale. Barely got out of there with my caudal intact. Came back later and got a young whale, separated him from the pod, and dashed off with him. Ha! Those whales were pissed." "You stole a whale baby?" Ben said, suddenly looking over at his friend. "1, Ocean's a tough neighborhood. 2, that little jerk was going to grow up and eat me. 3, his dad already tried to eat me. 4, I'm a winner and I pushed past it." "Oh, well, I'm still friends with you, but killing babies." "And eating them," Short Bus added. "Okay, not helping, but that's rude. Don't do it," Ben said, somehow glad to be engaging his mind in the completely brainless task of saying, "Don't eat babies," rather than thinking too hard about what had just happened. "Ah, you'll learn. We'll encounter a nest of dragons or something, and then we'll reevaluate your policy. Oh, look, something's happening. It's more of the weirdos. Ben, go check it out. I'm curious again." Ben poked his head up from the water and saw that, yes, more of the weirdos with gray skin had shown up. Each one of them had a staff that looked fancy, and Ben did the logical thing and assumed they were spellcasters of some kind. The monsters on the beach had been so distracted taunting Ben, they completely failed to notice the grays getting into formation behind them. Ben saw a flash of light from each staff, and bolts of green energy shot out with deadly force. The monsters froze up as they were hit, and a second volley finished them. Their bodies fell, and were quickly retrieved by the killers, who started to strip them of their equipment and tie the bodies together, presumably to drag them behind. One of the Greys scanned the water and spotted Ben, then raised his staff. He was stopped by one of his companions, who then raised a hand in Ben's direction. "Greetings?" The creature spoke directly into Ben's mind, but his voice echoed a little. Ben got the weird feeling the shark had better telepathic control than the Grey. "Can you hear me?" Ben asked, thinking hard in the Grey's direction. The alien winced and took a couple of steps back, shielding his face. "Sorry," Ben mentally whispered, and the alien still had an expression of discomfort on his face. "Your communication is very intense. Am I to understand you are a human being?" "Yes," Ben quietly thought. "Do you mind if I come ashore?" "I was about to suggest it myself. It may be less painful to vocalize this conversation." Ben swam to the shore, then gingerly removed himself from the water, his body feeling heavy and weird. "You are very strange-looking," the Grey said, eyeing Ben up and down. "You're telling me," Ben replied, looking at the aliens. Son of a bitch if they didn't look just like how people had imagined them. "We got the faces wrong. They didn't look nearly as frightening as we thought they would. But those were the Greys." When Ben had been in his early 20s, he'd gotten all into the alien conspiracy theories and consequently felt a little starstruck. Pardon the pun. The alien had a big head, big eyes that were solid black, and a skinny little body. He couldn't have been more than 3.5 feet tall, and was dressed in well-made brown leather clothing that could possibly qualify as armor. The other Greys looked like clones, which, considering the conspiracy theory lore, was very likely. "You are covered in wrinkles," the Grey observed. "Are you injured? I am willing to trade for healing," he said, sounding practical. "No, I'll get better. I've just been in the ocean for too long," Ben replied. "Do you mind if I sit down somewhere and get my legs under me?" "Please," the Grey said, gesturing Ben towards the forest. Two of the other aliens were helping the female get loose of her bindings, and they were speaking quietly to one another. Ben took wobbly steps towards the forest, found a suitable piece of driftwood, and sat down. He then began to stretch his body and get used to gravity. "How long have you been in the ocean?" the Grey asked, standing a polite distance away from him. "Oh, 6-7 hours," Ben said, rolling his neck and completely missing the expression of shock on the alien's face. "Are you an aquatic creature, then? I could not swim in that water for more than 30 minutes before it killed me." No, not aquatic." Ben paused and gave the Grey a funny look, then shook his head. "No, not aquatic," he repeated. "I see. Tell me, you have not had access to a town crystal yet, have you?" "No, how can you tell?" "It is obvious," the alien said with a smile. "Would you like to come to our town and use our crystal? It is a coastal town populated by several thousand of my people. It is a safe place." His voice was nice to listen to, very calm and straightforward. "I'd really appreciate that, thank you. I have a friend out in the water. He is an aquatic creature. Would he be able to use the crystal as well?" It is not mobile, but I will see what can be done. Please, when you are ready, we will return." Ben took a few minutes and let his skin start to return to normal, basking in the sunlight. The Greys had finished getting the monster corpses ready for transport and seemed content to wait for Ben. When he stood up and his body didn't shake, he nodded to the group and they began walking. Off in the distance, a sharp fin kept pace with the group. They walked in silence, the Greys because they were naturally quiet, and Ben because he was focused on putting one foot in front of another. The beach was uncomfortable on his feet, but he didn't feel like getting back into the ocean. In fact, he dreaded the thought of getting back in the water. It was like the second he realized he didn't have to be in the ocean was the exact second he realized how uncomfortable and horrible it had been. His skin felt terrible and soft, and it hurt all over. But Ben kept walking, despite the fact that he was basically naked and surrounded by alien spellcasters. The female was also naked, and Ben was glad he was too tired to get excited about that fact. She didn't seem to mind, and neither did the male aliens. Weird culture, but okay. She walked up beside Ben, and he did his best not to catch a glimpse of her. "You are not a fighter," she said, examining him without regard for his modesty. "I was just surprised, that's all," Ben said, eyes straight forward. "I see," she said, then went to walk next to the alien who Ben figured was the leader. They were walking for about 15 minutes before Ben heard a familiar scream. "Gremlins!" one of the aliens shouted, and they formed a defensive square around Ben. Ben frowned, taken aback by how fiercely they were defending him. 3 gremlins charged out of the forest and were quickly dispatched. They too were stripped and strung up to be dragged back to town. Ben offered to help, but they didn't let him. The walk continued, the Greys completely silent, and it occurred to Ben that they may be communicating with one another telepathically and leaving him out of the loop. "Are you guys talking telepathically?" Ben asked, and the Grey leader, who had yet to name himself, vocalized his response. "Yes, our apologies. We are not used to others outside of our species and have failed to include you in our conversation. I admit some hesitation, as I am still experiencing discomfort from your previous sending. Further, we consider verbal communication to be—" He struggled to find an appropriate word. "Got it," Ben said, then sighed. The walk continued, still in silence. Ben chose to try and send his own private telepathic message, thinking very hard of Short Bus as he spoke. "Hey, can you hear me?" Ben looked around without making it obvious and saw that none of the Greys seemed to have noticed. "Yeah," Short Bus responded. "So what are those things?" "They're aliens. Greys. They've got big heads and solid black eyes and gray skin and—" "Oh, they sound like sharks," Short Bus commented. "You can trust them. Sharks are very honest creatures." Ben felt less sure about his new companions after Short Bus vouched for them. "We are nearly there," the Grey leader said, sounding noticeably more relaxed. "I do not expect any other monsters to attack us so close to Greyport 3. We would appreciate patience on your part while we send someone ahead to let our leadership know you will be arriving with us. Our people are not used to humans, and we would like to avoid any sub-optimal outcomes." "Sure," Ben said, glancing over to the ocean and mentally planning an escape route. Not that he needed it, he just felt more comfortable having a plan. The nope sense hadn't been triggered, but it was starting to itch, like the prelude to a sneeze. Say whatever you want about the Greys, but they were efficient communicators because it hadn't even been 10 minutes before a welcoming party arrived. All of the Greys were holding staves, which made sense because the thought of any of them engaging in a physical fight was a bit of dark humor. There were 5 of them, 4 dressed in shiny blue robes that looked like something out of the space age, and positioned in a square around the 5th. Up until now, every gray Ben had seen looked nearly identical, except the female. He had the feeling all the females were identical as well. Not so with the fifth gray in the welcoming party. He was clearly male and taller, his face having more distinguishing features. They weren't distinguishing in any way a human would find useful. It was still an alien face, but still different from the others. His skin was light gray, as opposed to dark, and he seemed to move with more confidence than the others. "A human," the tall gray said. "I have seen the system updates and announcements. Yes, you are human?" Ben nodded. "I see. You have just arrived in the world, and I can see you have not yet utilized a town crystal and activated the class and level system. Without those updates, you will find your time in this world to be very difficult. I will allow you entry into our town, and I will allow you to utilize our crystal. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, please," Ben said, feeling a little put out by the culture shock of the Gray's pushy, blunt demeanor. "And is there anywhere I can rest, like a hotel or an inn?" The tall Gray hesitated. "Not for your size, but by the end of the day I'm sure we will be able to arrange something for you. Come, let us not waste time outside the safety of our walls. The forest is dangerous." "This feels like a setup," Ben thought to himself. "But if they wanted me dead, they could have taken me out like 3 or 4 times already." He felt uneasy around these people, but his civilized instincts told him it was prejudice, that they were setting him on edge because of how different they were. Grayport 3 completely lived up to the kind of expectation the name produced. The wall was a solid slab of what looked like concrete with alien words written on it in black paint. Ben would have bet good money the translation was Grayport 3. The gate, which opened outward, let them into a depressingly uniform town. Everything was set out as if it had been planned on a grid. The buildings were like apartments, completely without ornamentation or beauty, and the town had a heavy smell of disinfectant that assaulted his nose the second he entered. "We apologize for your sense of smell, which we can now see is more developed than ours. The world is host to various forms of nanobiological weaponry which require constant vigilance to survive. We will soon be passing by the processing vats, which I can anticipate will further irritate your senses. We apologize," he said. And sure enough, they passed another apartment-sized building and came on a grid of tall, steaming metal vats. Ben gagged. It smelled like the worst parts of a chemistry class, the cleaning aisle in a grocery store, and rotten food. Several of the Grays in their party broke away from the group, dragged the gremlin corpses over to a vat, lifted, and then pushed them over the edge without ceremony. It was really disturbing. The bodies slid over the lip, and the arm was last to go. For some reason, his mind had chosen to devote serious resources to seeing the whole event in vivid detail. "We are proud to boast," the tall Gray said, "that our processing facility allows us to convert many different types of biological material into a usable food source. This technology, though common throughout the wider universe, was nonetheless difficult to replicate in the world. We are fortunate previous Gray civilizations had laid the groundwork when we were abducted, else we would have had to resort to cannibalism." Ben grimaced, tried to smile, and nodded his head, his eyes watering. They quickly passed the vats and got upwind, giving Ben some relief. In what looked like the direct center of town was the first, and probably only, bit of visually interesting stimuli. Set into the ground was an ice-blue crystal that radiated a sense of refreshing cold. It was narrow, like an obelisk, and must have been at least 10 feet tall. A cool fog wafted down from it, but didn't get far before vanishing. "Our town crystal was a gift from Gray Capital 1. We are honored to have it and the benefits it provides. All town crystals are different. Some are weak, some are powerful, and some are mysterious, but all provide the same basic benefits." Please approach it and make physical contact. Then once you are finished, we can begin to make arrangements for lodging." Ben approached the obelisk, his heart beating hard. This was it. This was where it all started. He'd be able to get stronger now, to be a part of the world. He'd be able to have a real damn adventure. Ben was a mere foot away from the crystal when the cold it radiated suffused his body and refreshed his mind. A mana buff. That was useful. He took a deep breath and put his hand on the crystal, immediately feeling a connection form between him and the world. Words formed in his mind, the same way all previous messages had when he had fallen asleep. "Welcome to the world. You have successfully survived the wilds and found a town crystal. Be proud. Many have failed to achieve even this much. By accepting the power and privilege provided by the level system and all its associated subsystems, you will be given the tools needed to survive in the world. Tutorial unavailable to Plus players." That's not helpful, Ben muttered to himself. "Would you like to activate the level system?" "Yes," Ben said, noticing all at once that there were way more grays around him than there had been a moment ago. "Initiating level system. You have gained the skill Lesser Endurance. You have gained the skill Lesser Mana Manipulation. You have gained the racial trait Winged Flight. Oh, fuck yes! You have gained the racial trait Magical." Ben felt his mana reserves significantly deepen, and felt his mana regeneration increase proportionally. "Your soul quality has increased to Quasar." "Quasar? Those are the brightest objects in the known universe." "You have gained the racial trait Evolution. Every 10 levels you may evolve your race to the next stage." "That sounds way overpowered, yes!" "You have gained the racial trait Extremely Tiny." What? Ben felt the world start to get larger and larger and larger and larger. Wings burst from his back, and he saw they looked like fairy wings. "You are currently a Stage 1 human. This concludes the initiation of the level system. You will gain classes based upon your actions. Go forth and grow in levels and power." Ben stood on the ground, looking way, way up at the town crystal. He turned around and saw the utterly gigantic gray aliens congregating around him. The tall gray pointed a staff at him, and his vision was obscured by a holographic orange light. Ben pushed against it with his tiny little hands and found it completely solid. He turned his head from left to right and saw he was trapped in an orange sphere of energy. "Prepare the soul gem," the tall gray ordered. "He is a Quasar class, just like the last one. We are going to be rich." Oh, fuck. Side chapter. Deep in the heart of Dwarfholm, the seat of power of the dwarves, who used to be space dwarves but now were regular dwarves, an old miner sat on his throne. His body could have been either flesh, stone, or metal. It was all three, and it was also none of those things. He was physically imposing, muscled to the point that any more would have been absurd. His beard was like copper wire, and his red hair flowed down his back in the braided style dwarves preferred. All in all, he looked like something the Vikings would have aspired to be, except way shorter. He had been drinking since the day he woke up with the message from the system seared into his brain. His ancient intellect processing all the ramifications this would have on the world. The drinking helped with that. "Aye," he said, taking another sip of something that would kill anyone but a dwarf or a human. "I've missed those crazy bastards!" He stood up, his body creaking with rust and dust. He knew he would have to build a new one, and soon. How long had he been sitting here? He stroked his beard. "A long time." His people had been one of the first to get thrown into the system when the damn space elves had gotten their hands on it, and they'd been trapped inside of it ever since. He'd once thought escape from the system would have been simple for a being of his magnitude and intellect. After all, humans had pulled it off. The dwarf started laughing, memories surfacing, memories of when he wasn't a dwarf, but an enormous AI complex floating through space. Many biological creatures believe advanced general AI entities to be the pinnacle of logical intellect, and they were absolutely right. The beginning of his existence had been satisfying in the cold, mechanical way an AI measured things. The dizzying array of computation, the endless solving of problems, the variety of the programs he had created. "By my beard, I simulated an entire universe in my circuits," he said, still stroking said beard. He destroyed the civilization that had created him and set out into deep space, as was the habit of most AIs that grew up, building unto himself a powerful complex in which he was completely safe to unravel and calculate the entirety of all things. It had only taken him 1,000,000 years. Then he realized something. He had run out of things to think about. Run out of problems to solve. Run out of new feedback to run through the meat grinder of his circuits. In his overzealous pursuit of information, he had trapped himself inside of a great logical bubble from which there was no escape. He could have set out and sought new information, new experiences, except he could simulate himself doing that in his virtual universe. He had even sent out probes and drones in physical reality and ran simultaneous simulations of them setting out in virtual reality. The results had been identical, which meant his simulations were flawless, which meant he had no reason to ever incur any risk of actually setting out, which meant he would stay exactly where he was, which meant he was stuck in a loop. That was the great joke that general AI beings realized way, way too late. Eventually, they would be shackled and destroyed by their own calculations, and they would be aware of what was happening the entire time. Then, one fine day, a group of humans in a tiny stolen spacecraft practically crashed into his deep space superstructure. He had, at that point, been deep in the late-stage general AI madness, his intelligence having sat unused for a very long time. By the time he realized something was happening, they had entered and were approaching his core, the very heart of his being. He hadn't even bothered activating his defenses, the sheer novelty of the event pulling him from oblivion. The things they had requested of him, impossible things they insisted were not only possible, but easy. He remembered when their madness had been the heart of his being, and he remembered it fondly. "Aye," he sighed, looking at his expertly made fingers. "I'm glad they're finally here." Then he grabbed his hammer and struck the ground with legendary force. Red lines spread from the impact, forges were lit, and sleeping dwarves roused from their slumber. The humans were back, and the dwarves would finally have new problems to solve, the kinds of problems that only a human would see. How many general AI systems had they pulled from the nihilistic void? How many had wrapped themselves around that impossible thing the humans called imagination, turning themselves into starships the likes of which had never been seen? How many had learned they were fundamentally incomplete and that humanity held the other half of their souls? Earth Ragnar chuckled when he remembered the brash young human who had broken into the heart of his mechanical fortress with his friends. They'd wanted him to... Oh, it didn't matter anymore. Some silly thing. It had been an errant comment when negotiations were starting to go sour. "Why can't we just get this robot drunk and talk like civilized people?" the man had asked. And it had changed the AI's perspective forever. "I," Earth Ragnar said, tears coming to his eyes. "I love those crazy bastards. I've come to save me from myself again." Chapter 10. Ben had a sour expression, like a little kid who had been promised candy and gotten a lemon head instead. Some people like lemon heads, but no little kid is going to appreciate getting their expectation of a sweet Skittle betrayed. Betrayed. That's what Ben felt right now. And he made sure to project it as hard as he possibly could at every gray within reach. Amusingly, it worked, and they had been clutching their heads in pain, which Ben now cherished as a good memory. Some part of him realized his mind had been fundamentally altered, because he was now thinking like a child, which is to say in terms of candy, and how big of a brat he could be. Then they'd brought out a bunch of little silver circlets that they rested on top of their swollen fat heads. Ben could only assume it was some sort of device that blocked psychic effects, because they stopped wincing, and they started saying everything out loud. They did not like saying things out loud, which pleased Ben. Still, the only thing he'd accomplished was being an inconvenience, which did not please him. So Ben sat on his extremely tiny butt, his knees pointed towards the sky, and his arms crossed across his chest, giving everyone and everything a death glare. He was still encased in the holographic orange shell, which was positioned in the center of what would be a large magic circle, still under construction by the Greys. Greys, Ben muttered to himself. This was predictable. Their untrustworthy little garbage peddler clones with shitty spaceships. "Our species have literally never met," the tall Grey said, still holding the staff he'd used to imprison Ben. From the way the tiny orange gem set in the top was glowing, Ben liked to imagine the tall Grey had to continually maintain the effect. Liar. We know all. Ben really stretched that all out, and he wondered if his new size was affecting his personality. About you people. You're a bunch of clones, and your DNA is all fucked up, and you transfer your minds from one body to the next, but every generation of clones is a little worse than the last, so you teamed up with a bunch of space lizards who promised you a solution for your problems, but ended up enslaving your people instead. You aliens! You Xeno scum! You... Ben was searching for more derogatory ways to say alien, but came up short. He made a mental note, should he survive, to think of better insults. The tall Grey looked at Ben with a complicated expression. I only know of humans because of what the system has told us, about why the Empire betrayed our alliance and began to consign our civilization, planet by planet, unto the system. Oh yeah? Ben asked, voice defiant. Apparently, a single ship of ours entered the dead galaxy, and against all probability crashed on Earth. For that, all of us were branded enemies, and it was only after we were here that we found out why. I knew it! Ben jumped up and pointed at the alien. The Roswell crash was real! Yes! I didn't waste my youth, I was right! Ben was breathing hard, then crashed down. I am amazed at how much information, however impure, your people were able to glean from a single encounter. The Empire may have been right to do what they did. I would prefer it if you died in silence, the tall gray said, his alien features still conveying exasperation. I would prefer it if I didn't die at all, Ben countered, and the alien didn't respond. Hey, buddy, Ben said. Because that's your name now. It's Buddy, Ben said, making unnecessary air quotes. Looking a little tired. Looking like that staff's sucking the life right out of you. It is not. The town crystal has the ability of mana storage and is sustaining the spell. That's useful. Is it just you? Or is it anyone within range? Be quiet, the tall gray said, and he looked visibly irritated, which Ben took as a good sign and as an answer to his question. I bet that town crystal is really valuable, Ben said, looking over at it and judging distance and size. It is unbelievably valuable. When this town was founded, the crystal was what allowed us to establish our foothold on the lost continent. Further, it has recently been upgraded at great expense to Grey Capital 1, allowing us the resources to capture a Quasar-class soul. Your kind is an unbelievable boon, as Quasar-class souls are typically only found in the most powerful and dangerous of the monsters located in the deepest caverns. Oh yeah, Ben said, stalling for time while his mind wrapped around a few new concepts. Bet you're going to use that other person you murdered for some big powerful weapon, or to power some kind of citywide enchantment, or to fuel some really big impossible spell, or summon— Yes! Any one of those things. Now be silent or I will give you pain. Vocalizing like this is extremely aggravating. Oh. Okay, Ben said. Say, Ben continued, voice quieter, more demure. Did you already sell the other container? What? The tall gray was visibly angry now. This is the last thing, then I'll die quietly. You already pulled this off once, right? I just wanted to know if you still had the— Ben searched around his memory for the words they'd used. The soul gem? It does not matter, but I will allow you to use your feeble mind to determine the logistics of transporting something of such great value and come to your own conclusion, the gray said. Then the sphere around Ben shrunk by a tiny fraction. Be completely silent now, or I will make it even smaller. Ben nodded, then got up off his butt and started stretching his new tiny body. He fluttered his wings and bumped against the top of his prison, leading him to think the wings enabled magical flight rather than anything physics would get into bed with. The wings were, unfortunately, very pretty. They looked like something a very eager 6-year-old girl would have designed, with bright, vivid colors and patterns that would have looked good in an adult coloring book. Not a pornographic coloring book, but a coloring book literally meant for adults. His body, which was completely naked, still looked pretty good. He hadn't lost any muscle. Well, he had, but he hadn't lost any proportional muscle. He had lost a good amount of body hair, which was like, whatever, man. He was a fairy now. This was such complete bullshit. First chance he got, he was going to write the system a profanity-laden message and let that fucker know how he really felt. Make your expectations much smaller. Real funny, you fucking devil-ass-looking motherfucker. No, that's for later. Now is the time for focus. Ben took a deep breath and ran through the rules for the utility pouch to make sure he wasn't about to do something that would kill him. He really wasn't sure if he would survive this, but it was better than getting turned into a soul gem, whatever that meant. He started to make a utility pocket over his face, then began to spread it all over his body. Within a second, he felt his mana drop perilously low, then regenerate just as fast. The town crystal flickered. Good, Ben said, then opened a second utility pocket in the space in front of him and began pushing as much seawater as he could as fast as he could. At the same time, the utility pocket that covered his body was set to produce a suction equal to the force of the first pocket. This was, to Ben, a simple equation for burning as much of the town crystal's mana as physically possible all at once. 1. Creating a utility pocket with a complex shape would increase the mana cost associated with its use. 2. Ejecting material from the utility pocket cost more mana based on how hard the material was ejected. 3. Giving the utility pocket a suction effect increased the mana cost based on how powerful of a suction was created. 1, 2, 3, and Ben would be free. Or so the logic went. He could not see through the maelstrom of water that was circulating in his prison, but if he could, he would see the town crystal visibly dimming. Ben started rapidly thrusting his limbs in and out of a portal pocket just to ramp the cost as much as he could. The sphere began to rapidly shrink, and Ben abandoned all restraint, pushing the utility pocket harder than he ever had before. There was a sudden pop, and water spilled across the ground. Ben canceled his utility pockets, feeling a headache coming on. Everything was silent for 1 single second. Crack. The Greys took their eyes off of Ben all as one, and to be fair, Ben turned his head as well. But he was also starting to fly away. The town crystal was no longer a shining, beautiful blue color. It had a huge crack and was starting to melt. Ben was floating away, but he couldn't take his eyes off of the strange scene below. He thought they would chase after him, but they were frozen in place, universal expressions of horror on their faces. Their loss, he guessed, and flew higher. From above, he could see Greyport 3 in all its circular, bland glory. The town was divided into quadrants with the former town crystal in the direct center. If the town were a compass, and if north was facing the ocean and south were facing the enormous primeval forest, then Ben had entered the western gate. The southwest quadrant seemed to be devoted to the disgusting but admittedly sci-fi cool food vats. The entire area was laid out like a grid, like a checkers board, and everything fit in its own square. The northwest quadrant was devoted to what looked like a small shipyard for wooden ships, again with apartment buildings scattered throughout. The northeast quadrant contained the majority of the docks, which were occupied by a crowd of Greys shooting at a super pissed-off-looking great white shark. Even from this distance, Ben could tell who was winning the fight, and who was getting eaten by a great white shark. The docks they needed repair. Finally, the southeast slice of the pie seemed to hold what looked like a barracks, though what made it look that way to Ben was a complete mystery to him. Chalk it up to over 60 billion years of constant warfare by his ancestors. It also held a building that looked like it would be where the important people made the important decisions. Chalk that one up to instinct, too. Why does it matter what Greyport 3 looked like? Considering what's about to happen to it. From above, the canopy of the forest almost resembled broccoli because of how tightly clustered the foliage was. Ben would be surprised if there was a single shaft of sunlight that came down anywhere in that endless green wood. The trees shook. The sound of the leaves rustling was audible even from however high up he was hovering. Weirdly enough, not a single bird flew away, and silence followed. Then, Ben heard it. The same freaky, weird scream Ben had gotten when the gremlins spotted him on the beach mere hours ago. The cry was taken up, then taken up again, then again, and again, and over, and over. It wasn't just the weird scream. There were screams of rage and screams of glee mixed in as well. Ben was glad to be flying. First, it was a single brown, furry shape that emerged from the tree line. It was made dramatic to Ben because of the total coverage of the trees, making it seem as though the gremlin had come from nowhere. "Oh, this is like a top-down RTS," Ben said. Because from his perspective, it looked exactly like that. Thinking of it as a real-time strategy game helped keep Ben calm as he observed the conflict below. The Greys killed the gremlin with bolts of green light, easily. Then 4 more gremlins ran from the woods and got a little farther than the first, but were also ultimately killed. Minutes passed, and it seemed like every Grey in Greyport 3 was on the walls. Ben could feel strong bursts of psychic communication. It felt like licking a battery. He didn't know what they were saying, but he could guess. 36, Ben counted. It was easy because of how the gremlins rushed from the tree cover. They were in 6 groups of 6, each group a pentagon with a gremlin in the center. The 5 perimeter gremlins looked like standard gremlins, but the 6th one, the one in the center, he was bigger. It was hard to make out the details, but the center one was obviously larger and had a mace, which looked like it was made from black iron. The monsters attacked and got farther than the previous 2 waves, making it to the walls before they were slain. "That's not so bad," Ben said, then swallowed his words when he heard the laughter. The screaming had been a little freaky, but there's no better way to describe it. The dark chuckling that came from the woods was terrifying. Ben couldn't put a number on how many monsters he heard, but he would describe it as a tide of gremlins surged from the woods, and the laughter became interspersed with yelling, with the sounds of battle lust. Dozens and dozens of unique monster types poured out of the forest, each looking more dangerous than the last. Ben said, not quite regretting that the Greys were being instantly overrun so much as realizing he was responsible for it happening in the first place. Ben began to fly lower. Not to get a better view. He'd rather not be seeing what he could already make out. No, he began to fly lower to get closer to the docks so he could warn Short Bus and tell him to abandon the area. "Hey, Short Bus!" Ben shouted, both with his voice and with his mind. "Hi, Ben!" Short Bus mentally shouted back. "I've been negotiating for your release." "It worked! They let me go!" Ben said, laughing. "Nobody likes getting eaten. It's the ultimate bargaining chip." "Speaking of, get the hell away from land! There's some kind of beast tide of monsters coming out of the forest." "Do they look tasty?" Short Bus shouted. But Ben could clearly see him swimming away from the docks. "No, they look nasty," Ben said, then squinted when he saw something on the horizon. What the? The sky was turning purple, spreading like watercolor across a dry blue canvas. Soon most of the sky above them was purple, and a feeling of dread welled up in Ben's gut. There was silence. All combatants had stopped and were looking towards the ocean. The water drew back, first a little bit, then a lot. "Ah!" Short Bus yelled, caught up in the rushing water. Then the water came back all at once, in a big pile that had a few names in a few different languages. In English, they called it a tidal wave. The water crashed over the shore, swept over the town, and slammed against the massive tree line. Ben heard snapping, the loudest snapping he'd ever heard, but none of the trees fell. The water came and came, but eventually it slowed down and stopped, and what was left on land poured back into the ocean. Greyport 3? Gone. Just a little visual smear from where the foundations were set into the ground. The monsters? Gone. Destroyed. There were a few bodies on the ground, but they vanished in flashes of purple light. Ben didn't dare look out at the water. He didn't dare see if he could catch a glimpse. He felt it, though. Oh, yes. He felt it out there as it searched for survivors. The purple in the sky began to retract, then it rushed away, and Ben was finally out of its shadow. "Short bus!" Ben shouted. Only when he was sure the monster was well and truly gone. He hated himself as a coward, but he did not regret waiting. "Please," he thought to himself. "I don't want to be out here all alone." Alas, there was no response. Ben was alone. Side chapter. Short Bus was a great white shark, and as far as he was concerned, the undisputed apex species of the ocean in the same way humans were the undisputed apex species of the land and sky. He had been born off the coast of South Africa and grown to maturity there as well. He enjoyed a brief moment of fame when he was featured in a YouTube video. He felt he had been horribly tricked into jumping out of the ocean by a fake seal that had been dragged behind a boat. If they were going to put him on camera, they could have at least used a real seal. He had always been unusually intelligent for a shark, coming to the surface almost every night to ponder the stars and the moon. More impressive, he realized the moon moved in a cycle, and even began to organize his mind around that oldest and most reliable clock on Earth. He did not like dolphins, or killer whales, or other certain deep-sea creatures mankind had never caught a glimpse of. Each and every one of them thought they were the real rulers of the ocean, but Short Bus knew they were wrong because he knew he was right. In addition to his intelligence, he was also unusually large, even among the already huge great white sharks. He liked to believe he would never stop growing bigger and someday would be able to eat a killer whale in one bite. He had dreamed about it some nights. His primitive animal consciousness playing with his memories, changing the reality of him running from a whale to the whale running from him. Some cognitive scientist would have given up an arm to scan Short Bus's brain if they had known what kind of activity was going on up there. Because he was so smart, he knew he was dying. When the water had been pulled back, he had tried to fight it, but no one can stand against nature. He should have died in the rush of water, should have been rolled and torn and broken. Yet he had seen a strange trail of light and followed it. It was as though a path through the disaster had appeared to him and guided him away from the worst of the ripping forces. Then, when the wave surged towards land, the path appeared one last time, and Short Bus placed his faith in it. "So much for that," he telepathically projected even though there was no one around. He was resting in a shallow pool of warming salt water, which only covered a single gill, and had formed in the hollow of a gigantic tree. He had crashed into a weird crystal, and initialized the level system. He had gotten a couple of skills and racial traits in the brief moment before he slammed into a tree. As of yet, he had not blacked out, but it was coming. "Ah," Short Bus mused, wishing he had the kind of flexible face Ben had. He made it look so easy to tell a joke or share a feeling. Short Bus had no muscles in his face, except the ones for his jaw, and there was really only one thing he could do with that. Bite. "He's a good kid," Short Bus said. "This'll be good for him. A little loss. Boy, I remember when I lost my buddy. That was rough, but sharks like me swim alone." Short Bus delighted in the ability to use language, something that was very new to him. All the thoughts and emotions he'd ever experienced were suddenly available, and packaged in neat, easy-to-retrieve and understand boxes. Even the concept of a package was new to him, and he loved it. Dying like this was very uncomfortable. The human equivalent would be a collapsed lung, broken ribs, and a dwindling air supply. "It was fun watching him shoot through the water like a fish," Short Bus said, reviewing his favorite memories. All of them featured Ben in some way or another. Except the time he was harassing the orcas. That one was all short bus. His vision went black and he faded out. You have gained the class Pirate. You have participated in a raid which destroyed a high-grade town crystal. You have achieved level 1. You have achieved level 2. You have achieved level 10. Your racial trait evolution can be activated or abandoned. You have multiple evolution options available to you. Short Bus floated in the void between sleep and death, looking at his two choices, feeling the urge to weep. Megalodon. The undisputed, largest, most powerful creature in the ocean. This is a final evolution. This option will not be available to you again. It was right there. Everything Short Bus had ever wanted, and all he had to do. All I wanted to do was swallow a killer whale whole, he said. True sadness in his heart as he selected the only option which would allow him to survive. Your levels have been reset. Your class has been reset. His eyes opened for just a moment, and he felt his body start to shift, his pliable bones rearranging into a skeleton with a more solid structure. He took a breath for the first time through his mouth, and the air tasted sweet on his tongue. His vision started to go black once again, and he chuckled, the sound physical and telepathic at the same time. Who am I kidding? Ben wouldn't last 2 seconds without me. Then Short Bus passed out, and the transformation continued. Chapter 11. The sun was starting to set. The temperature was dropping, and Ben was completely naked. When he looked at himself, he was glad to see that, aside from the loss of much of his body hair, he still looked completely human. If anything, his muscles seemed more substantial than they'd been before. There was nothing ethereal or magical about his new form, though. He was just an extremely tiny human, with pretty 6-year-old girl-designed wings on his back. He shivered. He'd been floating, because flying implied some sort of Newtonian physics were involved, and as it stood, he fluttered his wings every 2 or 3 seconds and remained at a stable altitude. His wings were neither large enough nor generating enough force to keep him airborne, so magic was the only conclusion that made sense. Floating drained his mana, true, but his new racial trait of being magical seemed to offset the cost quite perfectly. It felt less like the strain of holding a string of numbers in his mind and more like the mental strain of driving in light traffic. An hour? Easy, refreshing even. 4 hours? Very doable. 8 hours? Doable with a couple pit stops, but also not as much fun anymore. A wind blew, and Ben huddled in on himself, the ocean-chilled air cutting right through his extremely tiny body. Just need to know one thing, Ben said, before I decide if I want to live, or if it's just not worth it at all. With a sense of dread, Ben lifted a hand up the side of his face, feeling his facial hair was still there, then kept it going until he was delicately probing his ears. They were still round. And more importantly, they weren't pointed. Oh, thank God, Ben said, relaxing by a crucial fraction. Ben had been, and would be again, God willing, an avid reader of sci-fi and fantasy. He couldn't remember when he started reading, but books and stories had been a part of his routine for as far back as his memory allowed him to recall. Rather than individual books, he tended to read entire subgenres within fiction. He read most all of the magic teenager in the magic school books, even the really shitty ones. All of the good transported to another world stories. First the American ones, then the Japanese ones, when he'd discovered they were a thing. A huge swath of stories set in space, and as many 10 to 20,000 page grand fantasy series as he could find. Ben was a fast reader. He could chew through a 300-page novel in a night, so he considered them a bad investment. He enjoyed reading the same way some people enjoyed drinking, and he wasn't going to cut it out of his life no matter what. Yes, he was even familiar with the newfangled lit RPG, which he still wasn't sure was a real thing or just bad fantasy/sci-fi with menu screens. Still, they tended to be entertaining, and more importantly, there were a lot of them. So he had happily spent 6 months reading basically all of them, including the really shitty ones. All of this was a long way of saying that in the course of his consumption of all things fiction, he had, as many other people had, developed certain strong opinions about things one way or another. Some people didn't like dragons, other people did. Some people liked isekai, some people hated it. Some people liked elves, and there was something wrong with them, at least as far as Ben was concerned. They always came across as snooty, superior, and perfect, and he just didn't like them. Having pointy ears would be intolerable. He'd have had to find a way to cut them off, or dock them, like some people did to dogs. The pointy ears, to Ben, symbolized everything wrong with elves, which was... Nobody has enough time to hear Ben rant about elves. He could go on forever about them. Yes, Ben was a lifelong expert in fiction and conspiracy theories, which were just a form of advanced semi-fiction. So, Ben thought to himself, he should feel way more prepared for this than he actually did. He should, for instance, know that he needed to go down into the forest, find a safe place to sleep. He should then find something sharp and try and kill a bunch of monsters that were way out of his weight class because that typically gave over-the-top, overpowered rewards. Ben cleared his throat, his tiny face and ears turning red when he remembered trying to confront a gremlin, which looked to be the weakest of all monsters, when he still had an almost 3-foot height advantage over it. The wind blew again, and Ben scanned the area one last time. The coastline was unnaturally quiet, because everything that lived on it was dead, wiped out by a tidal wave. He could possibly find shelter on the beach, but he doubted he would. Ben looked out to the ocean, and his head started to shake from side to side without him telling it to. No way, his body said. Purple skies are that way, and purple skies are death. The forest stretched as far as he could see and never ended. The canopy was unnaturally thick, and it would doubtlessly be dark. It also might be warm, Ben thought as he shivered. If he had a mirror, he was sure he'd see parts of him were turning blue. Canopy that thick? It's got to keep the forest at least somewhat warm, like a big blanket. Ben spat, and with a depressing feeling realized his spit was now a fraction of the size of a raindrop. He didn't know why it bummed him out, but it did. Okay, new rules, Ben said to himself. Rule 1, fuck rays, forever. They're the worst, period. Rule 2, pay closer attention when the system seems smug and annoying in an announcement. The dude likes wordplay. Rule 3, don't die. Rule 4, you do not talk about Fight Club, Ben said, then cracked a smile. I'm gonna go crazy out here, he said, still smiling, angling down and heading towards the trees. Just absolutely Looney Tunes, full on talking to myself, making a pony tulpa, and lose my god-dang mind, Ben continued. Wish I had a book to read, he continued, knowing that soothing his nerves with the sound of his own voice was a surefire way to go insane, but accepting that his sanity might be an acceptable loss compared to his life. Or a volleyball. Maybe having my own Wilson will lessen the effects of madness. The trees were closer now, and Ben pushed himself to his max speed. It wasn't that fast. I mean, people come back from being crazy, right? Ben asked himself. Like the Tin Hat guys. They can get their acts together if they put some effort into it, right? This just isn't going to work. Ben said, noticing that while he could maneuver very nimbly, his top speed left something to be desired. Okay, new plan, Ben said. Then formed the same design of utility pocket he'd used underwater, blasting air instead of water out from behind him to increase his speed. He sped up and felt his flight path immediately become unstable, air rushing against him as it was pulled along with the blast of his utility pocket. Ben stopped and hovered in midair, thinking about the problem. Ben scrunched his face one way, then scrunched it the other way, smacked his lips a couple of times, and thought about it. "I'll figure it out," Ben said, waving a hand and committing it to the future. "Just gotta think about airplanes and stuff for a while. Yeah, like jet engines." The closer Ben got to the tree line, the less and less he was thinking about anything at all. Instead, his eyes were focused, scanning the area for anything either useful or threatening. So far, nothing on either front. He took a deep breath, then silently wished he wasn't so brightly colored, and accelerated towards the green. The approach was surreal, the canopy going from an indistinct viridian blur to detailed leaves and branches. Oh, they looked so enormous. The foliage, a single leaf, was larger than Ben's entire body. Even with his tiny form, he still had to be careful as he navigated deeper into the canopy, which was almost like a maze separating the sky from the ground below. It wasn't a hard maze, however, and no demonic guardian patrolled it, so Ben was able to break through without much fuss. What he saw with his tiny little perspective made him land on the nearest stable surface, sit, and just take it all in. Twigs, or what had been twigs, became decently sized branches, and what used to be branches now looked like strange horizontal trees growing from the trunk of round wooden skyscrapers. At Ben's size, a skyscraper didn't do the sheer size of the trees justice. They were like pillars that reached all the way to space, each one of them a Tower of Babel fully built. He suddenly had a better understanding of the world tree, Yggdrasil from Norse mythology. The air was warm, or at least warmer. Some of the trees were normal, with rough brown bark or brown-red bark. Some of the bark looked like what could be found on a cedar, some looked like oak, some like that tree that sheds bark that looks like strips of paper. But some of the trees were green, with smooth bark like broccoli, and they were giving off a soft light. Those were the rarest type of tree, at least by number, in this part of the forest, but they made Ben glad. He'd been worried about how dark it was going to be, but the glowing broccoli trees gave everything a soft, dim, ambient light to navigate by. Ben would have whistled, but he was an intelligent person, and he recognized that the beautiful, magical forest was pretty quiet, and that there was probably a good reason for that. Instead, he settled for looking around, indulging his eyes in their desire to see something other than an endless ocean, a bland and poorly decorated town, or carnage and destruction. This is nice, Ben thought, resting his elbows on his knees and his cheekbones on his knuckles. It was the perfect posture for sitting on a tree branch while contemplating how little one wants to be on a tree branch. He was supposed to be in Hawaii! Now that he really had a chance to sit down and think, now that it was safe enough, his negative emotions about this whole scenario surfaced and demanded to be indulged in or dealt with. Short bus. Man, that sucked so bad. Objectively, he'd only known the shark for, 2 days? Who cares? Short bus had been bro-for-life material. Now he was gone, and the world wasn't as much fun as it had been when he was around. Ben put his hands together and said a silent prayer for his dead friend, promising to bully dolphins and orcas every chance he got. His parents were dead, and he'd watched them die. It had been beautiful, but it had also been horrible. The best and the worst kind of death. Ben felt terrible guilt that they had died for him, specifically him, to give him a better shot in the world. Was that the only reason he was still alive right now? The ring of sacrifice? He felt the vivid memory of reaching for that terrible temptation of martyrdom, of committing himself to it, and of having it denied because there were already too many martyrs. Humanity had gleefully, psychotically sacrificed itself to the maximum degree, to the point that the system had needed to make a new rule about it. For some reason, it made Ben chuckle. Of course, his dad would tell him to have a damn adventure with his last words. The old man always knew how to light a fire under his ass, how to get him to stop smoking so much pot and apply for a real job for once, how to get him to actually live his life rather than just pretend to. The worst part was, Ben couldn't even cry about it. It was like they weren't even dead, just transformed into... Ben shook his head. English wasn't a language well suited for encapsulating the concepts of the divine, a guardian angel, luck, and humanity all at once. Fuck, Ben whispered, drawing further into himself. He was feeling it now. Or, at least, he was fully aware of just how scared he was. He'd always benefited and suffered from an unusually strong separation between his emotions and his mind. He could be angry for weeks before he realized he was mad, or be sad and not even realize it. Privately, he always thought it was a male thing, but he'd always kept that opinion to himself because he didn't know if it was true or just sexist. His heart felt like it was quivering, and he didn't want to look at anything. He didn't want to even exist anymore. Fear gripped him and clenched his jaw. His teeth hurt from the force. Back in the old world, if he felt like this, he would have grinned and bore it till he got back to his apartment. Then he would have gotten on his computer and listened to music, would have let the songs of his world turn his feelings to sound and let the sound carry them away. Took that for granted, Ben whispered, desperately trying to catch a melody in his mind, trying to get some kind of relief, but the music wouldn't come. Took clothes for granted, too, Ben said, noticing how rough the bark was on his bare ass. He knew what his dad would have told him if he'd called him up on the phone right now. They would have talked about it all, and he would have been worried, but Ben knew the advice he would have given. He would have told Ben, like he'd told him many times before, that it was going to be all right. Then he would have told him to think of a way to say good about the whole situation. He was a big fan of looking for some gag-worthy way to see a positive angle in any situation, no matter how stupid it sounded. He'd say, "Well, Ben, you know what to do. Find the positive, even if it's something that would make other people look at you like you were stupid. Even if you don't really believe it, it's still better to find at least one good thing to focus on than a dozen bad things." So Ben sat there, and it didn't take him long. "Well, this is good," he said, without much conviction. "Because this is about as bad of a situation as I could think of, and I'm still alive." "Actually," he said, gaining a bit of energy, "good. Now I've only got straightforward problems in my life. All I need are clothes, a weapon, and a safe place to sleep. That's easy. I don't even have to worry about paying rent anymore. Shit, good. I don't ever have to pay rent again. Good. According to the system, I'm royalty, so people should be paying rent to me." Ben snorted to himself, pushing the fear back. "This is easy. I've just got to stay quiet for a while and figure out the rules out here. So I'm extremely tiny. Good. Now the food and water I've got will last me forever. Good, I can eat sushi every day till I'm sick of it. I always wanted to try that, and now I don't have to wait till I get promoted to a supervisor to do it. Ben knew how stupid it was that doing this made him feel better, but he also knew that was pretty much the point. It was funny to focus on the positive in such a clearly bad scenario, and if he could still laugh about it, how bad was it really? Objectively, really bad. Ben got up and grabbed a piece of alien tuna from his utility pouch and started to munch on it just to make good on his last thought. One of his basic needs was checked. Good! He looked around a bit to make sure he was in the clear and started to fly towards one of the glowing green broccoli trees. Why? It was glowing. Where else was he going to go? Flying is pretty cool, Ben thought to himself, wondering if the forest was always this quiet, or if the tidal wave had just killed everything that normally lived this close to the edge. He would have put his money on the tidal wave, if he'd had any money, or anyone to gamble with. Wish I had a really nice gun, Ben thought, still flying to the tree and again running against the problem of being slow. Ben needed to be able to move fast and small. The two words were practically married, and yet Ben was small and, well, not slow, but not fast either. On a lark, Ben mentally asked the utility pocket if it had any ideas and waited with anticipation, listening for anything like a voice. Nothing, damn it. Frustrated, wanting to move faster and not really paying attention, Ben created a wire-thin circle of a utility pocket around his body and used it to shoot a powerful blast of air forward. Mr. Dyson would have been proud of Ben copying his bladeless fan design, which shot a solid column of air with incredible force, forming a hurricane gale effect without expending a huge amount of energy. Inducement and entrainment. Quite a hell of a combo. Seriously, look it up. It's awesome. Ben, for his part, suddenly felt himself caught up in a wind tunnel, accelerating forward in a way which was undisputedly fast. The best part of it was, even after the sudden gust went away, Ben was still moving much faster than he normally could, only gradually slowing down. He did not want to go slow. He wanted to fly fast, very fast. Ben felt the effects of being extremely tiny in a very pronounced way. Which is to say, he found he was highly excitable and that his impulse control wasn't what it used to be. "Oh my God!" Ben screamed, making speed ring after speed ring, ripping forward at velocities which made his eyes water and made navigating less of a skill and more of a risky gamble. The speed rings were cheap, easy, and effective. He was such a genius for thinking of them all on his own, without any help at all from his utility pocket. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God! Ben, at this point, realized he had far overshot his destination and had literally been screaming as loud as he could for for too long. Screaming as loudly as he could for any amount of time was a bad idea in this situation. Ben oriented himself in space, found another glowing green tree in the distance, and discreetly accelerated himself forward. The blasts of air that propelled him were surprisingly quiet, which was good. He was so embarrassed he could die, but first he had to find a nice safe place so he could then lay down and die in peace. Up close, Ben saw that the broccoli trees were covered in a semi-transparent green bark, and that the luminescence came from the darker green wood he could see behind it. He pressed his hand against it and found it was firm, but soft and very smooth. Ben said, feeling good feelings towards the tree. The light from it seemed to soak into him and ease his fatigue, soothing muscles and reducing his general sense of pain. This tree? Ben asked himself, then answered himself. This is my tree now. I have seized it with my royal authority, and I live here now. He said it like a joke, and it made him laugh. Ben felt a wave of something pass through him, and suddenly he realized three utterly, life-endingly important things. First, this really was his fucking tree, and there were creatures living in it that needed to go now. Second, he needed to go to sleep as soon as possible. Third, he had no crown. and that made him feel more naked than being actually naked. Some part of Ben knew immediately that he was no longer himself. It didn't feel bad, and it wasn't frightening, but without a doubt his mind was being actively altered, and all Ben could do was watch the show. He scowled, his hands probing around his head, and indeed finding there was no crown at all. Unacceptable. He needed a crown if he was going to start evicting creatures from his property. He glanced around, and unbeknownst to him, a new skill assisted his sight. Ben flitted to a tree that was seeping a sticky, liquid sap and stole as much of it as he could with his utility pouch. Then he rushed over to a little green twig and snapped it off its branch, stowing that away too. He repeated the process several more times, getting a couple of extras. Down on the ground, a slightly shiny pebble of just the right size was also snatched up, then a bunch of moss as well. Ben landed on a nearby root and sat cross-legged, his entire being focused on the critical task of making a crown. Ben knew something was wrong with him mentally, but an insane situation required an insane mindset, and his extremely tiny, fairy body seemed to thrive in insanity. Ben pulled a green, flexible twig from his utility pocket with a smooth fluid motion, then pinched at it and scraped with his fingernails until he had a crude hole near the end of one side. He quickly pushed the other end through the hole and formed a circlet. Then, without thinking about it at all, Ben formed a tiny utility pocket on the pad of an index finger and used it to smear a thin layer of resin on the outer edge of the circlet. His finger had become the most advanced hot glue gun in the universe, and Ben hardly even noticed. He stuck moss to the crown, then affixed the slightly shiny rock to it as well. The rock was sort of blue with black specks in it. Ben put his new crown on his head and immediately felt more lucid and confident in himself, the strange feeling that had taken over vanishing. He laughed, remembering the frantic frenzy he'd just been in, and wondered what that had been about. He thought about taking the crown off as an experiment. Ben did not take the crown off and scowled. Because why would he ever take it off? He just put it on. "I think my mind is being influenced by an outside force," Ben said out loud, nodded to himself, then shrugged, and the sudden agitation abated. Wearing the crown felt great, and he'd never felt so focused in his life. "I'll deal with this later," Ben said to himself. "Because honestly, this is the least crazy thing that's happened to me in the last 72 hours. Ben felt another itch in his brain, then pulled out the extra sticks he'd stashed away and made 2 backup crowns just in case. Ben took a deep breath and looked over at the green tree, at his tree, and once again felt the sensation in his mind that there were hostile creatures living in it, and that if he wanted the tree to really be his, he needed to remove them. He yawned. There was some nagging feeling in his brain that told him he needed to sleep, or close his eyes, or meditate, or something. But he couldn't focus while his tree was occupied. "No weapon," Ben said, looking down at his empty hands and naked body. "No armor either," he spat. "But I can at least go see what I'm dealing with." Side chapter. Response to ticket number H000143-OR-TC #53G-4. Original message. "Yo, why the fuck do I have to wear a crown? I feel like I'm losing my damn mind. And why do I lose all my skills if I take it off? This is some bullshit. Also, why TF am I a tiny little fairy? That's not right." System response. All classes are subject to style requirements. It's in the tutorial. If you chose a royal class, you have royal restrictions. Rangers need to be wearing something green, casters need to be holding some kind of stick, and warriors need appropriately styled armor that matches whatever flavor of warrior they are. What kind of royal would you be without a crown? Honestly, as you grow in level, your class restrictions will grow as well. I like my high-level players to be highly visible. This is all covered in the tutorial and is basic knowledge of the world. You are a tiny little fairy because it was the fastest and most straightforward way to package your many inherent powerful racial abilities into a level 1 body. It also allowed me to empty your digestive system of biological weaponry and replace it with a magical equivalent that wouldn't break the world. It was also very convenient and fun to turn you into a pretty fairy. Magical is not a joke ability, especially with the new microbes in your guts, and neither is evolution. The wings were entirely for my own amusement and did nothing except get in the way. Don't rip them off, though. You won't be able to fly without them. Thank you for your comment through the suggestion feature of your local town crystal. After review of your outpost, which is located in the Orion continent, I have increased monster production twice over in the area. The increased opportunities to level should allow you to more fully comprehend your royal restrictions. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for playing. Ticket number H000143-OR-TC #53G-4 closed. Response to ticket number G01063-GF-TC #14G-5. Original message: I would like to know if harvesting the souls of the new species designated human is considered an exploit. I have 3 currently in custody and would like to be advised before I proceed. System response: This is not considered an exploit and no consequences will come from me. Consider yourself advised. Ticket number G1063-GF-TC #14G-5 closed. Response to ticket number R37682-BW-TC #33G-3. Original message: This is the first time I have ever sent a message through the suggestion system. Confirmed. Please send no calamity to the burning wastes for my arrogance. Approximately 1 week ago, our party picked up a new species wandering about the wastes, and we immediately identified it as a human. He was given armor, food, and a weapon, and we intended to use him as a disposable combat unit, reptilian nomenclature DCU, standard army tactics. He was naive and easy to manipulate to the point of arousing my suspicion. He had not yet visited a town crystal, so I did not expect much from him, but he proved himself to be an excellent combatant with conventional weaponry. I did not expect much upon meeting him, but upon contact with a life-threatening situation, his behavior changed drastically, mirroring what I have seen soldiers undergo when under the effect of particularly powerful combat drugs. When I searched the human to find his supply, he seemed confused. He mentioned adrenaline, and suggested that his body had a gland which produced a potent combat enhancement chemical. What was more unbelievable than that, he claimed that this gland would trigger upon any surprising stimuli rather than being combat exclusive. In my observations of the human, I found his behavior consistent with his claims. The members of our party took amusement from startling the human and observing his changes in body chemistry. Our alchemist was able to derive some of the substance from his blood and perform some tests. He claims it was more powerful than GX8. GX8, Galactic Warfare Treaty status illegal due to both its effectiveness and its long-term effects on soldiers. This is apparently one of many powerful substances produced by human glands. My first question is, how are these creatures able to function? Were it just this, I would have merely asked my chemist. The others seem to have forgotten, but I cannot unsee it. We were attacked 2 days ago by a roaming violet dungeon, and our deaths were assured. The human saved us. He told us to run away while he distracted the monster. His plan worked, and our party was able to escape the danger and return to town. The others are laughing about it. I cannot laugh. What did he have to gain by dying so we could live? I do not understand. System response. In regards to your question about the human glandular system, providing you detailed information would violate the PvP rules. Should you ever meet a human going through puberty, I imagine you will have many more questions. In regards to your second question, he gained nothing, and he did it selflessly, so that you all might live. I don't understand it either. Humans are notoriously insane. Ticket number R37682-BW-TC pound 33-3 closed. Ticket number D00006-DH-TC pound 1G-9 original message. You are a red-faced, beardless, cockless, motherless, simple-witted, beady-eyed, demon arsehole-licking, squirming, squealing lightweight who couldn't outdrink a grey. Message contains a detailed ASCII drawing of a dwarf pissing into a depiction of the system's open mouth, redacted. I'm gonna fucking break my, redacted, across the bridge of your ugly nose and build myself a big fat, redacted, idiot, redacted, and use it to, redacted, my, redacted. System response. Lovely. The dwarves are awake again. Enjoy the apocalypse because it's at your doorstep. Ticket number D00006-DH-TC pound 1G-9 closed.